Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac Address. My name's Tom Connell. I'm the president here at the club and also an anchor at Sky News and chief election analyst as well. Clive Palmer is chairman of Mineralogy. He's described as many things, a mining magnate whose net worth depends on who you ask. He was a lifetime LNP member who unseated an LNP member in the 2013 election in the seat of Fairfax. Along the way, there's been a dinosaur theme park, the occasional kip in Parliament, unhappy residents at Coolum Resort and workers at Queensland Nickel, twerking, a near-death experience with COVID-19 and a rapacious appetite for litigation. Allegedly as well, the plans for Titanic 2 are still in train, I've been assured. In recent years, though, his biggest impact on politics has been spending hundreds of millions of dollars on political campaigns, keeping fact-checkers busy, perhaps, and according to Labor, costing it, perhaps, a winning chance in 2019. He appears today as chairman of Trumpet of Patriots. He was saying trumpet, so he can perhaps tell me why the pronunciation is thus. He's going to give a prelude of how he wants to shape the 2025 campaign. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is PressClubAust. You can use the hashtag NPC. Please welcome Clive Palmer to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I'd like to recognise the Trumpet of Patriots leader, Sue Ellen Wrightson, who's here today. She's standing at the coming election in the seat of Hunter in New South Wales, and of course Senator Ralph Babat, Senator for the United Australia Party from Victoria. The Trumpet of Patriots is a registered political party with an Australian Electoral Commission. We will stand candidates in the House of Representatives and the Senate in the 2025 election. The party believes in many of the policies similar to the Trump administration, which we trust will be effective in bringing the United States back on track. On the 25th of March in Newcastle, Sue Ellen Wrightson will be hosting Tucker Carlson live from the United States, one of the highest anchors ever rated in the United States in cable news programming. Tucker now runs his own successful media channel at the Tucker Carlson Network, where he has interviewed some of the world's biggest personalities, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and many, many other world leaders. Tucker's support, together with Elon Musk, played a key role in the election of President Donald Trump. Not only will he be joining us in Newcastle, we'll be undertaking a tour right across the country in all the capital cities where Tucker will beam in from the United States, give a speech, comment on our elections and what our policies could be. We'll also be joined by former Reagan White House staffer Dinesh D'Souza and filmmaker, which many of you will have seen his film in the last visit from Tucker with me and the Freedom Tour that we did last year. We think that tour will offer a compelling insight into some of the issues. One of the things about politics is that it can be extremely boring, especially when you're dealing with politicians. The Trumpet of Patriots believes it's time to throw out the politicians, to look at policies that are best for Australia and how we can reinvigorate the nation. At a recent Telereach poll conducted in February the 18th, 2025, and released to the media in February 26, support for the Trump policies and others was over 20%. And there was a large number of people, around 40%, that said they were thinking about voting for policies just like that. So I guess our party is capturing some of those ideas, and many of you will have seen some of our advertising and what we're talking about. Australians want to send a bold leadership to reinvigorate our nation. The Trumpet of Patriots is ready to deliver exactly that, plus specific policies that will secure our future and put our country first. One of the problems with the Albanese and Labor and Peter Dutton and his Liberals is that they're whingers. They look at what's wrong. They don't look at how we solve the problem. They don't provide solutions in leadership to solve the serious issues facing every Australians every day of the week, whether it's housing, whether it's the cost of living, a whole range of things. In the next 25 minutes, I will outline some of the party's main policies, common sense measures to stimulate, I hope, questions from the press that they may have for me following my address, so that you can understand what impact Trumpet of Patriots will have on the 2025 elections. It's not just standing for elections. It's not just getting candidates elected. It's a battle of ideas. We need new ideas in this country. We need to be reinvigorated. We need to set sail to a much better sunset than what we're experiencing at the moment. And that's one of the reasons why I'm helping in this campaign. And we've been very, very successful since the Trumpet of Patriots was announced. We've got now over 20,000 members across Australia, and thousands of people are joining every day because they've had enough of the boring politicians that don't answer questions. They've had enough of seeing their income decline lower and lower every week. They've had enough of their children being harassed at schools, and they want change. Australia needs common sense solutions. We believe it's time to throw out the professional politicians in the Labor and Liberal parties and to provide Australia with an alternative for this election. Peter Dutton has stated he's no Donald Trump, and we agree with him. Albanese has presided over a declining standard of living in this country. In each year he has served as Prime Minister. Australia needs new policies, and Australia wants them. Australians don't need to be welcomed to their own country. We respect all Australians. We don't need to be individually acknowledged by people we don't know and have never met. We need to respect all people that make up our country, and that includes the contributions that have been made to the development of Australia by so many ethnic groups from Europe, from Asia, and from South America. We're all important as Australians, wherever we come from, and we all deserve to be respected. We seek to reunite the nation and take away division and competition between Australians, and to do what we can, which is best for our community. Nelson Mandela, who I knew, rejected apartheid. Dr. Martin Luther King fought against separate development based on race. They fought hard for equality, and that's what all Australians want, equality and inclusion. We need to unite all Australians in that inclusion, and we need to recognise the equality of all people, whatever their background, wherever they come from, and whatever their needs may be, under our national flag representing our common values. All Australians are equal under the Southern Cross. Trumpet of Patriots will make Australia great again. Labor and Liberal groups have abandoned the needs for mainstream Australia. For over 20 years, Australian governments of all political persuasions have presented a misleading picture of our economy. They have consistently included the wealth of new immigrants in their economic calculations. They've done this to avoid responsibility. This practice has allowed them to claim economic achievements and inflate the figures of their national wealth when the press reviews it every year. In reality, these governments have failed to generally improve the lives and the wealth of Australian people who have elected them. Instead, they've overseen a decline in the standard of living for many prioritising the interests of others. Too much immigration beyond Australia's capacity overwhelms our housing and our infrastructure, our roads and our schools and hospitals. It creates congestion and destruction of communities. Australia should be for all Australians living here. That must be our first priority. And it must be the first priority of politicians that we elect to government, that they have a responsibility working for us, because they are employed by you to do a good job looking after you, not looking after some theory or someone from overseas, but performing for our community. And we need to demand that performance. Too many people are worried in Parliament, are worried about losing their seat because they know they wouldn't get a job outside Parliament. I've sat in Parliament. I've seen the quality of the people that operate the opposition and the government. It's appalling. They all go on picnics together on weekends and social outings, and whether they're Liberal or Labor, they love each other. They don't really dislike each other. Actually, they're quite adapted. They all agree on most things. That's why it's been really, really hard at this election to see the difference between Liberal and Labor. And that's why Australia hasn't got a real democracy. So with the Trumpet of Patriots, we're saying, what's wrong with having a policy debate about some of our ideas? What's wrong with looking at whether we can make this country better? Isn't that what politicians are supposed to do? And that's, we've had a uniparty for many years. And that's why they haven't brought the hard questions to government departments, they should have. That Elon Musk is doing in Washington at the moment. Elon Musk's team has uncovered nearly $5 trillion of waste in the US government in an annual budget of $35 trillion. So that's a pretty high amount, and he's still going. They've been paying Social Security for people who are 150 years old. And it's a bit crazy. Don't think the same thing isn't happening in this country. It is. And the people who are suffering are the population. They're suffering all of the time because they can't get the services. They can't get their local member of Parliament to do anything for them. Why? Because the bureaucracy wants to get bigger and bigger and protect itself in the future and to take your money and not have it there for your children. The Trumpet of Patriots will cut the waste that exists in Canberra and re-evaluate the priorities of government to return the Australian taxpayer value for their contribution. The world is changing. The United States of America, waste and corruption is finally being exposed. In Australia, for too long, Australians have suffered under the duopoly of power. Labor and Liberal parties against the interests of all Australians. It's either Tweedledum or Tweedledee, it's dumber or dumber, or it's B1 or B2. We want to change that. Whatever it is, nothing ever really changes in Canberra. This is my 10th address at the Press Club. They've got a better stage now and they've got a great leader in Tom, you know. I can say that. The other guys are pretty good too. Trumpet of Patriots wants to give Australians a real choice and a real opportunity for change. We want to review the government expenditure as a first priority. Trumpet of Patriots will put Australians first and make Australia great again. Our policy is to recognise that there are two genders, a man and a woman, male and female. And if you go on the website for the World Health Organisation, you'll find they recognise that. We all should recognise that too and put away debates that are very, very on the periphery and get to the heart of what's wrong with our economy and how we fix it. And I'll show you that in the next 10 minutes, how we can fix this country and make it a better place to live. We don't want women in sports, men in women's sports, especially boxing. All children should be entitled to a normal, safe environment in our schools and public toilets. All children must be entitled to decide who they are and what was their sexual orientation is when they're adults, after they've gone through puberty, not to have it forced on them before they've even commenced puberty. As I said already, men and women's clothing should not be confusing our children at school. Decisions in respect of gender issues need to be made by a person when they're adults. In the meantime, parents should not be excluded from any problem their child may be experiencing. While Labor and Liberals are for they, them, the Trumpet of Patriots are for you. One of the most pressing needs for Australia since Federation has been the need for capital to develop our country. Australia has always been an importer of capital. That's why foreign investment has been so important for our country. In the first decade of this century, Australia looked to China to provide investment in the form of equity and loans to Australian companies and projects. That experiment has compromised our economy and our national security. Yet today, Australia has the world's second biggest super funds, with nearly $5 trillion of funds under management. The Australian government encourages contributions for your superannuation by setting a much, much lower tax regime for those contributions, for all Australians to make contribution to those funds. But the government, us, the people of this country, get little back in return. Most of the super funds, the majority of them, are not invested in this country. They're invested overseas, in the United States of America, in Europe, and in Asia. Imagine if we could capture those funds and bring them back to our country and reinvigorate our nation and develop some of our projects. We wouldn't be exporting iron ore at $100 a tonne, we'd be making steel at $3,000 a tonne. That's the difference. That's the jobs we would make, and that's the value we'd create. We'd stimulate the economy here rather than in the United States and Europe. You'll remember that notorious guy, Kevin Rudd. He recently held a forum in Washington and he brought with him government ministers and he brought with him all the Australian fund managers, and he promoted investment, not in Australia, not in our country where the money comes from, not where you vote for your government, but in the United States of America and in Asia. He was asking our fund managers to invest in Asia. And unfortunately, the media didn't cover it from the right angle. It wasn't a question of us going to the United States saying, you can take our money. It's your hard-earned money. It should be spent in this country to protect your future, to protect our communities, and to create growth. And there are projects in this country you can invest in. Don't believe the mediocre fund managers. You know, and projects I've had have invested over $18 billion. Our technology at Whyalla Steel Mill is hopeless, but the government's going to stick in another $2.5 million to try to protect it. They should pull it all down and reinvigorate it with a new project. And they could do that if they had the capital here rather than putting it in Europe and Asia and other places. Why should China reign supreme as the world's superpower in manufacturing based on Australian iron ore? That's right. 90% of China's iron ore comes from Western Australia. You control that. Why shouldn't we put a 15% licensing fee on our own iron ore? There's nowhere else they can buy it. Do you think Xi Jinping and his government is going to give up the preeminent position in world trade because of a measly 15%? But you know what that would do? That would pay off our government debt. It's either going to be paid off by you in higher taxes, or it can be paid off in the vigorous application and demand for our resources. The trouble is we've got politicians with no experience, that have never done international trade, that don't realise how much we're losing. It's time to bring Kevin Rudd back from Washington. There are not too many ambassadors in Washington that have insulted the President of the United States. Kevin Rudd ranks alone in that. Australia needs an effective representative in Washington that can support our nation in its time of toil, in a time when our living standards are declining and when Australian people are going hungry. Likewise, our Prime Minister has insulted the President on more than one occasion, has not apologised for those unprovoked public attacks. Is it any wonder that the President won't take Mr Albanese's call? You know, is it any wonder that the Trump administration wants nothing to do with a person that calls the President of the United States dishonest? Is it any wonder that that's what you're going to get if that's the sort of person you elect? Right? You know, Australia has an abundance of resources. Rather than use them to manufacture end products, we export them, when we could be making 20 times the amount by processing them here in Australia, rather than in Asia. Wages in Japan are higher than Australia, and yet Japan has become one of the world's major economies and exports based on Australian resources and Australian energy. If we redirect our capital and invest in the processing our own resources, we can make Australia great again. And if we look at our public service and we look at our infrastructure, we can get it working better. And where the waste is happening, we can apply that for the needy and those that need our support. The simple reason the cost of living is so high is because Australians are being ripped off by the political system and the lobbyists that support them. We can bring down the cost of living by bringing down the cost of energy, capital and housing. There is no reason why the government continues to spend taxpayer funds on renewable energy and continues to ban nuclear power. We don't want the government to fund nuclear power. We don't want the government to fund anything, because we know it's going to cost 5 times as much as the Willis industry does it. But certainly we should have our laws changed so that other forms of power can compete in this country like they do everywhere else. I find it difficult to accept that Australians are going hungry every night. My company recently donated $5 million to Food Bank recently, enough to provide Australians with 10 million meals. The Australian government only provides Food Bank with $1 million a year. Yet there are 3,700,000 households in this country which are having problems feeding themselves and feeding their children and having less than 1 meal a day. And that's a disgrace for our country. But what's the priority? What's the priority of the Albanese government? They give $1 million to Food Bank to feed Australians, yet it gives $600 million to Papua New Guinea to have a rugby league team. We've got to wake up in this country and wake up what's really happening. You're feeling suffering and hardship at the moment, but it's only a precursor of what's coming in the future. When we know that 3.7 million households in this country are experiencing hardship in feeding their families, this is a disgrace. Trumpet of Patriots, when elected, will ensure Australians don't go to bed hungry at night. The priorities of the Uniparty are not for Australians. The Trumpet of Patriots will put Australia first. You know, both Liberal and Labor have the same policies. They both have the multi-gender policy. I still don't know what the other genders can possibly be. They both offer the same funding for Medicare. You saw that happen very quickly when Albanese announced it. Dutton said, we'll do more, we'll spend $500 million more, but they didn't tell you it was for 2030. There's going to be another election before that. So they just pretended and tell you all this bullshit. Okay. And they both offered, and they both gave an undertaking to give a guarantee that the excise on our most important commodity, beer, would not increase before the next election. You know, I think it's more important to have a solution to the housing crisis than it is to have not to have an increase in beer. And we'll give you that solution in a minute. Right? The only difference they have in policy is that Peter Dutton wants to establish nuclear power with taxpayer money, and Labor opposes any form of nuclear power and instead wants to continue subsidising renewable energy with your money and ensuring the price of energy in this country continues to climb, and that industry decides it can't invest in Australia and they invest overseas. I'm saying that to you now as one of the wealthiest Australians, which the Financial Review says I've got over $23 billion of assets. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know I've been successful in business, and I do know I won't be using any renewable power in Australia if I'm investing in an energy project in the future, and that limits our country. Trumpet of Patriots wants industry at their cost, not yours, to be free to develop nuclear power. Let the market determine the best and lowest cost of energy for Australians, and let's bring down the cost of living. Let's now talk about the housing crisis across our nation and look at some of the solutions that have been employed internationally to deal with this problem. If we develop a fast train line 120 kilometres from our city, we can be back to our CBD in 20 minutes. And we can open up all of the cheaper land that's out in the western suburbs, the western areas of all of our cities, and we can still work in the city. We can have houses where our people will have a backyard, and the cost of providing that houses on that basis will be less than 50% of the average cost of Sydney housing in the moment, if we take Sydney as an example. But the need and the problem is there not just in Sydney. It's in Melbourne, it's in Brisbane, it's right across this country. And we need to develop a policy like that. That'll bring the actual cost of new housing down for Australians and provide them with a home for their family and a smaller community that they can relate to each other, and government should be leading that charge. But secondly, we've got to look at how do we finance these housing for young Australians that may be not as wealthy as all of us, or as me anyway, right? We look to changing the law so that 30% of your superannuation can be accessed to use as a deposit for a home. Everyone has got superannuation locked up, yet it's certainly investment in your retirement if you can access that super for your home. That should be happening immediately. That solves the deposit problem. If we look at Australia's balance sheet and its rating in the world, it can borrow money and make that money available at no more than 3%, still make a profit on it to all Australians for long-term housing. That's been done elsewhere. So with those three steps, developing the housing a lot cheaper, we say in the order of about $450,000 to $500,000 for a home, having your 30% of that deposit paid for you from your super, it's $150,000. Let's say, and you're left with $350,000 to be funded at 3%. You know what that means? That means Australians can live again. That means that our rentals will be available for people at a much lower price. Nearly a third of our Australians are renting at the moment. And this country, to its disgrace, has 120,000 homeless people that have nowhere to live. You don't hear Robert Holmes à Court talking about that, do you? He likes talking about me because he loves me so much. But that's the truth, you know. These people are your children, your brothers and sisters, your colleagues, people you went to school with, and they're out on the street because we've got this massive immigration, and I'm not against immigration, but more than our infrastructure can handle, and we've got interest rates that are so high that banks have repossessed houses and sold them to incoming people, and these people have nowhere to live. What comes next is the crime rate. And if we want to go like the United States, that's what comes next, you know? And we don't want that crime rate. We want to protect our country. I'm 71 years old. I'm too old to be in politics. I've got a limited future on this planet. But I have got the experience to realise that we've got to do something drastic. And Trumpet of Patriots is trying to do something drastic for this country. We may not get there, but we will try hard, and we've got some great candidates at this next election that are ordinary people, ordinary Australians that haven't been corrupted by being in Parliament, that don't have to rely on done deals to be endorsed, that don't speak in different languages. So I think that, you know, I hope that you'll all support us at the next election. Right? So I've talked to you before about Australia's debt, how it's crippling us, and how we can solve that debt problem by introducing a 15% licence fee on our iron ore. You know, there were licence fees in the 1960s on our mineral resources before, but we abandoned them. We did that because our two biggest countries, BHP and Rio, didn't want them. They wanted to sell it cheaper. They just wanted to make more and more profit. Really, and they funded the Liberal Party, right? They funded the Labor Party too. They had both sides of the coin, and they wanted to keep the prices low. And they sold out on the Australian future. What was good for BHP was good for Australia. What was good for Rio was good for Australia. And they didn't want independent development. And they wanted to stop this country moving ahead. But now we've got to take hold of ourselves and realise that we're in a crisis, that we've got to do something now or it'll be too late for our country and too late for our children. So by placing a 15% licence fee on the export of our iron ore, we can say the debt's dealt with and we can deal with that problem straight away. We can say our housing crisis is dealt with by adopting the policy I just sent to you. If we spend 200 million of the federal budget, which is not that much, we can feed all Australians and we can get homeless people back into houses, which you want to do. So all of those decisions to me are paramount. And I can't believe that the Liberal Party and the Labor Party don't know that. I know they know that. I know they won't do it because they're dealing with vested interests that only care about money. And I was a former member of the Liberal Party state executive. I was the biggest funder of the Liberal Party for 40 years. I was a living national treasure when all the Liberals voted for me for that, right? And I was a spokesman for the National Party too. So I know what goes on with the funding. As I said, I won't be here in a few more years, so you won't have to hear from me. But I can tell you now, it's bad. It's bad for our country. And we've got to do something about it. We've got to protect and care about the people who can't protect themselves. But we've got to invigorate this economy and create jobs for our children and futures. And we have the resources to do it. This country is one of the greatest countries in the world, the lucky country it used to be called, right? When maybe the unlucky country now. We're the lucky country because we were blessed with minerals. The largest coal exporter of Australia in the world is Australia, right? The largest iron ore exporter is Australia. We've got minerals, we've got copper, rare earths, everything that we need. And as I said, the Trumpet of Patriots believes in many of the same policies of Donald Trump. One of them being action, to do something, to stop what's happening, to realise just going along mumbling, boring day after day stuff is not going to get us there. So we can make Australia great. We'll be on the ballot. Our main aim is to reform the political process in this country and to protect and defend democracy. In the coming days and weeks, the Trumpet of Patriots will announce additional policies and candidates which can change the face of our economy and our country. Just to recap, the critical issues that we're looking at. Firstly, to feed hungry Australians. Secondly, to look at our housing with fast trains, access to our super for a deposit, and the government underwriting with its borrowing capacity a 3% cap on all new home loans. To retire our debt by a 15% licence fee on our iron ore, and to turbocharge this economy and get the country moving with the $5 trillion nearly of Australian capital and much of that goes overseas. Let's make Australia great again. Thanks very much.